Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. My name is Paul Robinson. I'm with IGI, and I have the pleasure of introducing Jim Ambrosini to the cybersecurity hot seat today. In the year that we've known each other, Jim has played a very instrumental role in my success in cybersecurity, and I feel that this conversation will lend a lot of value to you. Maybe get you some things that you can get back to your organizations that you work with. So first of all, Jim, just wanted to thank you for taking some time out of your busy schedule to speak with us.
My pleasure, Paul. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Fantastic. So I thought we'd just start with a quick overview of how you got into risk and cybersecurity and what kind of brought you to this point.
Sure. So, what a lot of people who have been in this profession who are my age tend to gravitate in from other fields, because back then, no one went to school for cybersecurity or information risk management. The field did not exist yet, at least the way it does today. So I was actually a journalism and communications major. So I graduated 1990, and based on the economy and the liberal arts degree, et cetera, I couldn't really find a lot of meaningful work. But I saw that computers were up and coming, and frankly, my friends who were computer science majors doing very well for themselves. So I wound up going back to school for about a year, taking computer programming classes. That led me to my first real job as a programmer. So what happened was, a couple of years after that, a system that I had built for the CIO came under audit. And I had instinctively programmed in certain controls and procedures and edit checks and so forth. And the IT auditor said, you have a good knack for this. Do you ever consider a field in IT risk and audit? I'm like, what's that? Anyway, he went on to explain it, and I thought, wow, what a great way to use a technical background, but also some of the communications background. Anyway, long story short, I wound up getting a job at Bear Stearns, which was a large investment bank at that time, in an information security and technology audit group. And then from there, I went to KPMG. It was the Big Eight back then. They started up an information risk management practice, and we did everything: IT audit, IT risk, information security. And then from there, as I went on to other positions, I got more and more involved with information security, and ultimately starting a cybersecurity consulting practice at a top 10 national accounting firm.
Awesome. Fantastic. Let the record show that Jim isn't good at math. He says he graduated in 1990, and as you can see from him, he graduated probably, we'll say 2009. So we'll get you later on that one. But no, that's a great path, and I think what you talked about there is so important for people to understand, is that soft skills are so important in our industry. I think a lot of people are intimidated that they need to know what a VLAN is, or a subnet is, in order to get into cyber, and it's just good communication and people skills can really get you a long way in the business. So that's a tremendous story. Thank you so much for sharing that. So our topic today is incident response, cyber breaches, which we'll talk about. That's a legal term, not a technical term, and just the impact that it has. One of the major nomenclature issues, we'll call it that, in our industry these days is, what is a cyber event, a cyber incident, and a cyber breach? So to kind of lay the foundation for the few minutes that we're going to be speaking here, can you kind of decipher the three and give our audience the ability to understand what each of those terms mean?
Sure. So, well, think of it kind of like a Venn diagram in a way. So a breach is a subset of a cyber incident. So a cyber incident is anything that indicates an attack or some anomalous behavior that looks suspicious. It could be something as simple as, let's say, an executive logging into the system, 2 o'clock in the morning from another country. Well, maybe he or she is there, maybe, and if they're not, then that's an incident. Someone gained their credentials. Or it could be something as outright as an attack, like a denial of service attack or evidence of hacking. Those are incidents and involve investigation. When you get into the breach piece of this, that is a confirmed, and that's the key word, data exfiltration. That means you know that whatever incident you were investigating wound up leading to data leaving the organization. Sometimes it's extremely obvious where people get phished and they say, I'm the CFO, I need all the workers' W-2s for taxes, send them to me. The accounting clerk or whoever sends it, and it's really a hacker in Russia. Well, data got out. That's an incident, but also a breach. In other cases, it's less known. There may be activity on the network. You may see some scanning, some systems going down, some other weird behavior, and then several months later, you realize, wow, we were actually hacked. And so there's really, the line of demarcation is really around when data gets pulled out. That's what triggers a lot of the notification rules and so forth.
Yeah, that's great. And it's good to clear up the naming conventions of that, because we'll have people that call and they'll say, well, I've been hacked. And, upon further review, it's just, something that's going on, but nothing, was compromised, no data was exfiltrated, anything like that. So, that's really important to understand. So, once we've identified what it is when we talk about a cyber incident or a cyber breach, the question really comes up to, what can organizations do to protect themselves against an incident or a breach? It's no secret that attacks are stepping up in an exponential form. I mean, it is truly. I believe John Chambers said it from Cisco. He said about 10 years ago, it's not if but when, and people were like, "Oh, that's just bud," and don't bother me with that. But now it really is seriously, not if but when. So what are a couple? Yeah. So what are a couple of things that you would say, if you were advising an organization, or if it was your organization that you'd work for, to say, hey, this is where we have to start. This is foundational. Then let's build it out from there.
Sure. I think that's a great question. I would say there are 4 things that I would encourage companies to focus on. And these have been proven time and time again to be able to either detect or prevent attacks, or even where if they do get attacked, to prevent the further escalation, and extremely important. So the first one is having advanced endpoint protection. So these are things like EDRs, endpoint detection and response, or another term, XDR, extended detection and response. So these are behavioral-based software components that sit on, let's say, the end user's workstation or a server. And when it detects anomalous activity, even in the operating system, because a lot of these hackers are really sophisticated, they could embed files that look like a regular Windows file or a Linux file, and the operating system can't really tell the difference, but these systems can. And what they do is they could either alert, or in some tools can actually block that attack in its tracks. This is super important. I mean, I don't want to get into specifics on vendors, but there's a lot of companies out there that specialize in this. So advanced endpoint protection, EDR, XDR, absolutely critical. As you get further into the network, the next piece is network segmentation. So a lot of companies, particularly smaller ones, have what you call a hard exterior, soft interior, meaning that once you get past the perimeter firewalls, it's a very flat network. So while that's easy to manage from a network administration standpoint, it's also easy for hackers to move laterally, as it's called. So you want to add further levels of protection and segment the network. So for example, if you have a critical server that has key documents, or let's say customer databases, you might want to think about segmenting that further, either with traditional firewalls, or there's even software tools that do what's called micro-segmentation, where you could essentially make it like almost like a virtual network, just with the software tools. But the point is, you don't want to have free reign inside of the network for anyone. It really has to be pared down, and so you have to think, what do people need to have access to, and what are the crown jewels, and how can you further isolate those? The next piece is quite obvious, but companies really fail to do this, is paring down the network administrators. And I don't just mean isolating them to just a handful that need it. That goes without saying. What I'm talking about is splitting up those accounts to make sure that someone does not have, let's say, the same administrator ID and password, and he or she is the administrator for, happens a lot in small companies, the firewall, the backups, and the network. Because what happens is those network accounts are targeted, and if that individual ever got phished and the hacker got their credentials, they essentially now have everything. So we like to see them broken down, different IDs, different passwords for everything that the network that the administrators would work on. And the last piece is the hardest one, I think, to implement, but it's also one of the most important. It's monitoring. Network monitoring, and then also monitoring of the logs. So what companies need to do is have a tool, something they're called like a SIM tool, or it could go out to a security operations center to ingest the logs from the firewalls and the servers and the workstations and other type of devices and just look for anomalous activity. Oftentimes, there are clear and present indications that a company is being hacked or scanned, but it goes unnoticed until the hacker actually pulls the switch and executes ransomware or notifies them or something goes down. Where if they had some of these monitoring, they'd be able to detect that. That's the hardest to implement. It's also the most expensive. So I would start with the first three and then work your way towards that monitoring, because all four of those are critically important.
Yeah, yeah. And one of the things I don't think people realize about when a cyber incident takes place is how it impacts the whole organization. I think one of the biggest misconceptions are that people are like, oh, it's a technology issue, and all they see are data centers and blinking lights and things like that. But especially in organizations that rely so heavily on the internet to conduct business, it happens too late, where people understand, wow, we really should have had this covered from a business perspective, which is, it leads to my next question of the value of an incident response plan, a holistic business incident response plan for organizations. Can you touch on that a little bit and share what the value would be of developing a plan and testing it?
Sure. So in my opinion, the value of having a plan, a documented plan, and you'd run through it with what's called a tabletop exercise, is just to provide a framework or a construct to go through, so when something happens, nobody's sitting there with like egg all over their face or deer in the head, like going, oh God, what do we do now? Do we take the system offline? Do we notify? It's all laid out. Realistically, companies are going to need help. They're going to have to phone a friend, and it's probably either a forensics team, or if they have cyber insurance, they notify cyber insurance, and they will make them work with certain approved forensics vendors, because companies, frankly, are not equipped to handle the investigation and what happened and remediation by themselves. But that doesn't negate the importance of having a documented incident response plan, particularly doing scenario planning. I mean, even the basic things: who declares the event, right? Who do you notify? What's the communication protocol? What are some of the steps you would do? I mean, a great thing to do is have IT, even the business, sit in a room and run through some scenarios. What if we got this particular virus, or what if we got this particular attack, and just think through what you would do. And in almost every case, so this is the real value of it. In every case, from going through that, you realize where there's holes in your either preparation, or there's holes in the network, or there's vulnerabilities. So that's the real value of doing that exercise and having the plan.
Yeah, that's really good. That's a good information for the business units to have, because as it really is an organizational wide function when you're dealing with cybersecurity and risk. I think ways that we've seen organizations get tripped up is that it's a technology issue. So technology needs to do security awareness training, they need to do policy procedures, and they need to do all this other stuff. And it's not what they went to school for. It's
Right.
not what the proficiencies in. The proficiencies in, network and making sure that everything is running and applications are available and things like that. It's really when it comes down to the actual business piece of, hey, if we're hard down as an organization for 30 to 35 days, how are we making money? And if we're not,
Yeah.
you know, can we go out of business? And that's another very audacious and strong statement to make. But people are going out of business very quickly,
Hmm.
declaring themselves unrecoverable from an event. So having the plan in place, the blueprint in place to get them through is really, really important. So that's really good. The last question I had for you was, I think we live in a world where experiential learning is key. It's not so much saying, talking in hypotheticals or what ifs, but really talking about real life world scenarios that take place and how would we respond to something like that. And that's really, I think, one thing that we like to get our clients here to talk about is, okay, what give me some real world experience of how you were impacted by a cyber incident, and what are some things you'd never want to see any organization go through. So if you have a quick story
Hmm.
or a couple of bullets as to some things that you've walked organizations through from a cyber incident perspective, and kind of the damaging
Yeah.
ramifications that it had to the business.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And the thing is that businesses need to understand that the damage is going to be profound, whether they have whether they're a large company, small company. A lot of companies really underestimate what happens, and as a result, tend to push some of the things on the security remediation roadmap further and further out. But then, magically, when some of these companies do get breached, the money comes available like overnight, and they want to
Hmm.
put things in as quickly as possible. And in many cases, if only they did some of these things earlier, it would have saved everybody a lot of grief. So, I mean, just this recently over the last couple of months. I mean, I worked with it was an online retailer who got hit with a denial of service attack the day after Thanksgiving, which was the biggest online retail day of the year, and they were out of commission till Tuesday. So they lost several days. It doesn't sound like much, but that's when they made a large amount of revenue. It was extremely devastating, and money they didn't get back. I worked on a mega breach. I led one, and the company, financially, because they're such a large company, could recover eventually. However, there were 14 state attorneys general that were doing the investigation, and believe me, there were charges that were being pressed. They were seeking damages on behalf of the constituents of those states, which led to others, and it was extremely catastrophic for this company. And the other thing too is, for any company, really, no matter how quickly you can recover, no matter how many deep pockets you have, it will tie up your IT team, your sales team, business, et cetera, for weeks. So
Mm.
it's not only the direct hit and dealing with the cost of that, and doing damage control, and dealing with regulators and consultants and attorneys and customers, et cetera, but it's also all of the projects that were on the strategic plan. They just go away because now the entire organization, or a large part of it, has to deal with recovery and damage control and all the other things that come about with after a breach. So it sets things back, just and it's just like ripples in the pond.
Yeah, from your beginning point, the analogy came up into my mind about my son's baseball team and how it's been very hot here nationwide, but especially in the Northeast. And we advised them before they played, hey, you got to have 16 to 24 ounces of water well before you even show up to the field, just to get
Right.
those fluids through you. Because if you come in and then you find yourself parched during the game, it's too late. Like it's
Yep.
it's just too late, because you're gonna crush stuff, and then you're going to get cramps in your stomach, and you're not going to feel well, and it's not going to be good. So it's the same thing for kind of this stuff. Hey, if you're doing minimal things to make sure that when it happens, I've seen pots set up in data centers. I've
Right.
seen, people sleeping at their desks because they just couldn't leave. They couldn't leave. So, and that's just because they were unprepared and they didn't have a plan to it. So, yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. So, no, this was great, Jim. Thank you so much for sharing. These are very practical ways that I believe our audience can at least ponder.
Yeah.
We're looking for people to ponder and to think about these things, and want to make sure that they understand exactly the risk that could come in without knowing and being prepared. God forbid an incident were to happen. So, again, Jim, we thank you so much for your time today on the cybersecurity hot seat, and we will look forward to seeing you in the not too distant future to talk about another topic.
That sounds great, Paul. Look forward to it.
Okay, thank you so much for your time, and thank you everybody for your time, and we look forward to talking to you soon. Take care.
Take care. Bye bye.